Okay. Ooh, excellent connection. That's great. That's a good thing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Digital Media Connecticut Live's YouTube series, Let's Talk Media. The time now is 4:56, so we're going to give it 4 minutes, and then we're going to start right on time at 5 o'clock. So even though you see us live now, we're not going to start for another 4 minutes. For those that are just tuning in and continuing to connect, we're going to give it about 2 minutes, and then we will start. Okay, it is 5 o'clock, so we will get going. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Digital Media Connecticut's YouTube live series, Let's Talk Media. My name is Wayne Edwards, and I am a full-time distinguished lecturer at the University of New Haven within the College of Arts and Sciences. I teach broadcast and convergent media, plus a little bit of journalism, and that's all within the Department of Communication, Film, and Media Studies. And in a life before that, for over 15 years, I was a live event producer at ESPN. So thanks for joining us. Our discussion this evening will focus on racial consciousness, especially within the media industry, and particularly affecting African Americans and people of color. Our panelists we're about to hear from are nothing short of remarkable when you learn about their career journey. Now, don't get me wrong. Journeys have their highs and lows, their long days and nights, and it's complete with hard work. However, for many Blacks and people of color, extra obstacles have been placed solely because of the color of our skin. As you will hear this evening, the digital media industry is not immune. So, students, as you aspire to succeed in this industry, which, by the way, needs more of us, listen to these stories and be attuned to the warning signs and allow this session to give you more of the interpersonal skills that's not normally covered in class. Our discussion, after our discussion, we'll have time for a question and answer session. So if you're looking on YouTube, look to the right, check out the chat function and post your questions there. Marvin, who is from Digital Media Connecticut, who has been instrumental in setting up this episode, will call the questions for us later. So let's begin by meeting our panelists. Our first panelist has had stops at CBS News, Discovery, and BET. Now he is a coordinating producer at ESPN, where for the past 17 years has overseen many of the network's flagship productions. Please welcome Michael Fountain.
Great to be here, Wayne. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Our next panelist has an eclectic background in media, business, education, management consulting, and community engagement. A freelance film producer and Connecticut native, this is Mallory Mason.
Thanks.
Hi, Mallory. Next up, she started her career as a radio personality. Since then, she has transitioned to television, where she is now the assistant news director at NBC Connecticut 30. She is Akemi Harrison.
Hi, everyone.
Next up is a panelist who started in healthcare, then transitioned to media sales. In his 20 plus years of media sales experience, he has navigated his way to VP of Demand Facilitation at Xander. This is Tony Franklin.
Hi, everyone.
Now, our last panelist, I saved for last on purpose because she has a great story. Not many can say that they went from high school to working at a big name company in a span of 4 years, right? So she'll explain more about that in just a bit. But for now, this is Danielle Richards, visual designer at IBM.
Hi, everyone.
So panelists, welcome. Listen, I just scratched the surface of the journey that you guys have taken and where you are now. Now I'd like for you all to just, tell us in your own words how you got to where you are today. And Akemi, let's start with you.
Good. Again, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. The short of it is determination and prayer, right? I started as in college. I got an internship at a radio station, started there at a small gospel radio station in Mississippi where I grew up. From there, I was able to get a job as a TV producer from another internship. And I was producing television newscasts in Mississippi, Sacramento, Oakland, California, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and eventually I climbed the ladder to become an executive producer. And now I'm climbing again, and I'm an assistant news director that oversees and helps oversee the entire news operation at NBC Connecticut.
Well done.
Sorry.
See that? There we go. Tony, tell us about your journey from healthcare to media sales.
Yeah, Wayne, it's been I've been very blessed in my career. I started off as a systems manager for a healthcare company called Corvell. A very fortuitous phone call to a friend of mine who offered me a sales position in construction, which I took. I took a big risk, but that risk turned out very, very well. And I did that for about 2-3 years. And then from there, I ended up going into television advertising, selling TV advertising here in Connecticut for used to be called TCI Media Services, but now that company is Comcast. And then from there, I wanted to stay in advertising. My manager was moving to Boston, so I followed him up to Boston and ended up working for Cablevision selling television. But then the key was moving to New York because I figured that, at least at that time, if I was going to stay in advertising, it was great to be in the Mecca. So I went to New York. I worked at a company called Newspapers First, selling national print advertising. After a few years, I ended up becoming the national sales manager of the office. We drove about $36 million in revenue. And then back in '06, as everyone knows, print advertising started to decline. And this little thing called the internet started to take off. So I ended up getting a sales director's job at a company called Undertone and was able to build up a sales team from scratch to eventually drive over $50 million in national digital ad sales. And then currently now I'm over at the VP of sales at Xandr, driving digital OTT and CTV advertising.
Very nice, nice. Mallory, how about you?
Hi, so my story is one, I think, of constant transformation and reinvention. So about 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted a career change. Prior to that, I was an image consultant and in business management. And I've always really loved documentaries. And so I wanted to learn how to produce and edit them. And so there was a program at public media that was called Institute for Advanced Media that was geared for adults, adult learning. And it taught you everything from video production to editing to graphic design and all other sorts of digital media things. And so I enrolled in that course. And then, you know, fast forward a year or so, I ended up landing a job at that media station. And here I am today. So yeah, that's the short of it.
Nice, thank you. Michael, tell us about your journey.
Michael, you're
Let's
on.
get you unmuted.
I'm sorry, I'm not having a great day.
There.
That's what happens when you get old. It's been a long journey. 40 some years in the business. Started out in local news, climbed the ranks in local news up to assistant news director. Was at the ripe old age of 30, I believe. I was a senior producer for Dan Rather and the CBS Evening News in New York. Then I got back into local news, and then I transitioned to sports after a brief stint producing documentaries at Discovery Health. Got into sports with ESPN. I've been there for about 18 years. Have done a bunch of things and had a lot of rewards along the way, but it's been a long and winding road to get to this point.
Great, thank you, Michael. Danielle, you know, she's one of our youngest here on the panelists, but an amazing story. So please tell us how you got to IBM.
Yeah, so I was born in Trinidad and I moved here when I was 3 years old. And basically, well, I went to school regularly. And when I mean here, I mean Brooklyn. And I've been in Brooklyn since. But when it came time for me to go to high school and transition from middle school, I had been going to Catholic school all along. And I ended up having to. So the New York City doesn't have the best system when it comes to matching students. So I ended up getting this school that I had little to no idea about, but the school ended up being a huge door opener in my life. It's called P-Tech. It's a unique 9 to 14 model where students are able to go get their high school diploma, but also their associate's degree at City Tech. So it's a partnership between IBM, the college partner being City Tech, and then New York City. It's a brainchild of my principal, who's amazing and who always made sure that we remember that we were scholars and that we were, you know, bigger than who we were before that. And whoever we thought we were, it's like the next person is, you know, he used to say, Danielle, you need to be Danielle 2.0. And I used to be like, what are you talking about? But I kind of get it, like, you know. So from there on out, I sort of just went through the program. I think Akemi mentioned this, but I will also say part of the reason I'm here at IBM is the prayers of my mother and the women that came before her. because she's just been a huge person in my life. So the support system I've had at school allowed me to use the tools in the program to get to IBM through mentors, through internships, through networking. And now I'm here, recently turned 23. Been at IBM for nearly 5 years. So yeah.
Janelle, thanks for rubbing in the fact that you're only 23. I'm really feeling good.
Right. And then something to take note about: tools and resources, right? That is so key when it comes to getting into the career, and also as your career evolves over time. Tools, resources, and the networking that's involved. So very important. Listen, we talk about obstacles that we face in the journeys that we take. But there is an additional layer when it comes to people of color. And I'm talking about transgressions of racial bias. Listen, they could be either benevolent or just, outright blatant at times. And it could be through actions or through words, but either way, this additional layer of obstacles has affected us for generations. And I think we've come at a crossroads, many crossroads in the year of 2020 that has taken us to the level of discussion and to shine a very bright light on this. So the first topic of discussion, when it comes to this industry, maybe even all the, any workplace industry, the push to be counted and heard, right? How many times have you've had an idea that you wanted to share with someone that's different from you, but the outcome, maybe they're not too as enthusiastic about the idea as you, or there's some other types of examples that we're going to get into. But Akemi, I want to start with you, because your journey, I mean, if you're going to cover the country, I mean, you've pretty much covered the country from South, West, Pennsylvania, and now to Connecticut. What has been some of the transgressions in terms of not being counted and heard that you've experienced in your journey?
Yeah, that one, because so again, I told you guys that I'm from Mississippi, like born in New Jersey, but raised in Mississippi. So you'd think that that would be the place that I had most of these transgressions or most of these issues. But no, it actually, I could name an example or give you guys an example of something, and you'd assume it's Mississippi, but it would have been, let's say, Pennsylvania, or it would have been Sacramento, So it didn't matter where I was. It's just there was some implicit bias, even if there wasn't just outright racist behavior, if you will, and just some encounters. So there have been times, like I know that, say, when the Sally Hemings story came out a few years ago, and they were saying, oh, it was, Thomas Jefferson's mistress. And I'm like, no, guys, she was enslaved, So having to be that voice is one thing that you're like, oh, it kind of rests on me. But I wanted to provide our viewers and listeners some examples of just interacting with your colleagues. So one example was when I was working at a station in Northern California, there was one other Black female producer. And people would call us each other's names all the time because they thought we were the same person. This woman has a completely different height, hairstyle, complexion, and her name sounds totally different. My name is Akemi. Her name sounded like Penelope, if that. So that was a form of those microaggressions you deal with, that you're like, hey, I'm actually somebody different. A different station in Northern California, we were doing a story on the cemetery that was called N-Word Cemetery, and they were trying to get the name off of there. It was awful. And I remember I had just started at this station, and we were in our editorial meeting, which when you're in a newsroom, you talk about the day's story. So conversations can get a little testy, or rather I should say tense, maybe not testy. And the white female anchor took the paper where she saw the sign that listed the cemetery as N-Word Cemetery, and she's just reading the N-words, and I'm like baffled, like, why does she have to do this? Mind you, I was very new in my career, and I was like, and I just moved far from home, so I'm like, okay, I don't know how to handle this, but I was just shocked. That was another thing that was really uncomfortable and inconsiderate, like tone deaf. Third example I'll share with you guys is I was at an East Coast station, and I felt like I had to fight to be respected. And so I remember I had just started at this station. I was an executive producer, and I had gone up to introduce myself to one member of the sports teams, one member of our sports anchor team. And I go up to him and I'm like, hi, and I had my hand out to shake it. And he looked me up and down, did like this, and walked away to talk to my direct report and give him the information. And eventually, when he learned I was one of the managers, he started to, respect me. But those are just little things that you realize it's different here for me. It's different for me in this place. And you'll find too, you may be the only person of color, and you have to be a voice for that community. Latino, Hispanic, you may just be that only voice. So, I do encourage those who are watching to use that voice, and don't be afraid to say, hey, this is inappropriate, or hey, I was uncomfortable by this, because oftentimes, because of implicit bias, people may actually not know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. That's where the benevolence come in, fight to be respected. I like that. And that, kind of transitions me, Michael, to you. Tell us about some experiences that you faced, maybe even, soliciting, you're in a position where you may have to solicit ideas to higher ups. Any experience with that?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't really matter what level that you obtain in your career. You can have as many wins, certainly far more wins than losses. And you can still run into these types of aggressions that we're talking about. I know, for instance, again, some of it may be built-in bias. I'm not sure, but there are times when you can send out an idea, and I'm the type of person, I'll just fire away. If you like the idea, fine. If you don't, I'm a big boy, just tell me. And we'll move on, or we'll tweak it, or we'll try to find something something better, excuse me. But there have been times when you send out an email and it's not returned. Okay, I get that. We get 1 million emails a day. You send out another email that's not returned. Okay, now we're starting to develop a pattern. And the pattern speaks to something more deliberate than just someone overlooking your email in the first place. Another example would be if you're in a meeting, which will happen. We have meetings. That's what we do in this industry. We meet all the time. We meet to schedule the next meeting. But when you're in a meeting and you have a really good idea, and for some reason it doesn't create the response that you expected from the rest of the group, and then several minutes later, someone else comes up with maybe not the exact same idea, but a similar idea. And all of a sudden, the people in charge are, oh my gosh, that's just tremendous. And you're sitting there like, well, what's different? I said pretty much the same thing 5 minutes ago. So what's really different here? So again, it doesn't matter how high that you climb, you're still going to run into things at times, and you just have to be prepared to recognize them and deal with them as best you can.
Yeah, so Tony, Mallory, Danielle, any experiences that you have faced that you want to share?
I'll chime in. This calls to mind. So again, I used to work at public media. I no longer work there. I now freelance produce, and this story is one of the reasons why, in fact. So similar to Akemi, at that station, I was one of 2 Black women. And I remember one day we entered the elevator and it stopped at the floor. The doors open. One of the VPs, who happened to be a white male, stepped onto the elevator, and he looked at us both and said, "What are you 2 conspiring to do?" Which in that moment, that's such a strong and specific word, conspiring, that has a lot of implications. I just thought, would he have said that, right, to anyone else? And we are the only 2 in the whole station. And so, and that was, within my first couple weeks at the station. So that kind of set the tone. And for me, it kind of lifted the veil of, you know, what I was walking into. And so it definitely, you know, made me second guess and kind of have my guard up around the folks that I was now, you know, a part of their team. But to me, you know, you could call that a microaggression, but I feel like that it's pretty blatant. It's pretty blatant. And, you know, of course it was framed, you know, as a joke, but I also think, you know, there's truth in jest too, so.
Yeah, you know, something that may be as, you know, said in innocence like that, probably, you know, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but, you know, we know deep down, you know, sometimes you can say things to different cultures that could be okay, right? But by not knowing and then saying the same thing to different cultures or races, it could be construed as, you know, racist or offensive, right? So, you know, we really, you know, they really have to just take a step back and really now evaluate the way that, you know, we greet folks. You know, because you know, different cultures have different understandings of things. Um, so, anyone else wanted to add in before I move to the next subject or next
Yeah.
topic? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that point. I think it's also interesting navigating the workplace, but also just conversations as culture becomes more homogenized and people are like tiptoeing around what they can and cannot say. Like one thing that I've always noticed is when I walk into a room, there's not much that I can hide from like my personality. You're going to assume whatever you want to assume. I'm going to walk in with most likely sneakers and cargos, and like you're going to assume like I'm some Soho kid or something like that. And it's very interesting when I think about myself in retrospect to IBM and the place that I take up and how I present. And knowing that, and also knowing my age, it's always been interesting to see how people interact with me and how I interact with them. One of the things that I've noticed, and I typically don't pick up on these cues. I'm bad like that, where I just move through life. But I have had the random instances where people often think I work at my office, but like work as in like clean up my office and stuff like that. Or like there's this one thing, I wash my dishes. So we all have like a communal floor. I wash my dishes only because like my mom just, you know, she'd beat me if I didn't. But I wash my dishes, and sometimes like people just dump stuff, and I've had the instance where it's like, oh, can you just wash this, and like stuff like, you know. So it's and it's not even like it's a thing where it's like blatant. It's like people, they make mistakes or things have happened, and it's obviously something that you don't even think about that's happened in the past. Like I've never been, and it's also really interesting how we are conditioned to go through life. My mom has always told me, like, even if someone disrespects you, hold your own and try and be respectful as much as possible or whatever. And I grew up in this really religious household, so I've always been very mum about things. So maybe that's why it sort of just brushes off my shoulder. And I think it's interesting how we don't really wait. I'm like, I wouldn't be like, yo, HR, you know what I mean? Like it isn't a thought, especially with the New York mindset too. It's like, I've seen worse has happened, blah, 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 or like stuff like that. So I think it's very interesting too, especially as a younger person, I guess, because I see a lot of my friends doing the same. Up until recently, with everything that's happened, everyone has been more vocal, but yeah.
Yeah, that's why we take advantage of this time now that kind of the planets are aligned. Let me just take it to the next topic, because we kind of you know, scratched the surface about it before, and that is being the only one. Sometimes we're the only one, like Michael has alluded to, being in the meeting, or maybe, as Mallory said, two, definitely less than a handful, right? Especially in this industry. Tony, I mean, you know, we've heard your journey. of your current Vice VP role. So in that journey, I know you've faced, you know, a few instances where you have been the only person of color in the department or in the meeting, right? Tell us about your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so it's interesting just listening to everyone as we kick off, and I could have jumped in and we could be here all day in terms of the things I had to deal with or the experiences I went through. As you stated, throughout my career, ever since I've been in sales, and even when I was in the healthcare industry, I, for the most part, was the only Black guy in everywhere, and especially in a management role. Even when I was on the healthcare side, I was the office manager. I had 20 individuals I was supervising. They all were white, and I just can tell you, it was a nightmare, right? And, you know, one of the things, I think Janelle spoke about this just a second ago, you know, my mother brought us, me and my brother and sister up in terms of educating us about racism, but telling us to never use it as an excuse, right? That we would have to work 3, 4, or 5 times harder to be able to achieve, but that's okay. And so the reason I bring that up, that's always been my mindset. So, you know, a lot of stuff that has happened in my career, you know, I had to learn how to basically deal with it and not look at it as if everything is about race, which can be difficult, because if you're looking at everything being about race, then it's going to be hard for you to be successful because life itself is very tough. But just to give you some examples, you know, I remember when I was working at Newspapers First, and I was the manager of our New York office. And I remember, you know, our ad director pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Tony, can we chat for a little bit?" And he said, "Listen, you know, you're doing such a great job." Now, mind you, he did promote me, but he basically wanted me to start talking like him. Okay. He wanted me to be like him. I came up with a nickname for him. I don't know if you ever saw the old Eddie Murphy Trading Places movie, okay, with Dan Aykroyd. So, but he was Winthrop, okay, the rich guy, that blue blood, blah, 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 right? So he wanted me to talk like him, be like him. And I'm going to sit here and tell you, in the beginning, I tried to do that, right? Because I was like, well, you know what? Let me try to be the best that I can be. Maybe I'm missing something. And finally, I just pushed back against that. I was like, wait a minute. I get the best out of me being me, okay? You have to be you. So at the end of the day, I pushed back and I said, listen, I can't be you. I'm going to be me. And more importantly, I asked him the question, why is it that you want me to be you? And he didn't answer, but I knew the reason, right? Now, all that being said, we're really great friends today. He's been instrumental in my career, but that was a big turning point, being in corporate America, that I had to learn to push back. And one of the things that I learned that I want to share here is a term that I came up with, I'm going to make sure you see me. And how I got that term was, I remember driving across, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so I was driving back to Michigan to visit family, and I stopped in Pennsylvania, and I stopped at the store to get some gas, and I walked in, and there was a few people ahead of me, and then I came up, and the person looked around me and said, can I help you? And I said, wait a minute, I was next. And he said, oh, I didn't see you. And I looked at him, and I thought, okay. Maybe he didn't see me. So since then, I've always had in my mind, I'm going to make sure you see me. And if you don't see me, I'm going to call you out. Now, how I transferred that into corporate America, when these microaggressions or any type of, you know, what I may term as being a racist type attitudes or anything that comes my way, I've learned to pull people aside and say, hey, now Wayne, can I chat with you for a second? And you say yes. And we'll have a cup of coffee and I'll ask you flat out, say, you know what, maybe it's me, but it seems like there's a problem between us. And the person obviously was, no, everything's good, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you sure? Because if it isn't, I want you to know now, I want to know now so we can work it out. And they back up, blah, blah, blah. So that's my term in terms of making sure you see me. And when I do that, believe it or not, I'll be honest with you, it kind of goes away because I called them. Now they know that I know what they're trying to do, right? So it's been something that I've shared with other colleagues of mine, and it's really, really worked because people will try to do, what we call subtle racism, be very subtle about certain things. I had certain colleagues, especially at the VP level, it's like a jockey, and Michael spoke about this a minute ago. It doesn't matter how many wins you have, right? As a Black executive, I've always got to continue to prove myself. Always. I've had people that I've seen people who I've run circles around. They get fired, and then 5 minutes later, get a new job making more money, where I'm afraid that if I get fired, I'll never get another shot. Okay? So that's real. That is real. And then second, backing up a little bit, in terms of, and Akemi talked about this, and Michael as well, in terms of, trying to fight to be able to have that voice, right? And for whatever reason in my career, people have always loved me. They always saw me as strategic, have a lot of ideas. I'm very gregarious. I'm very engaging. But it's always got to a point where people would stop listening to what I had to say. All right? And I'll give you an example. So I remember I was working at Undertone. Our chief revenue officer called me into his office. And he said, "Tony, can I chat with you for a second?" Yep. We sitting down. And then he starts kind of going off on me a little bit. You know what? He calls me TT. One of the things is, I look for you for ideas. I look for blah, blah, blah. I don't feel like I'm getting this from you, blah, 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 blah. And I just said, And then when he finished, I said, "Okay, Fred." I said, "But let me ask you this. Every time I give you an idea, you say no to it. Every time I tell you something that we could do strategic, you don't listen to me." And I marched off about 10 things. And he looked at me and said, "T, I'm sorry I was talking out of both sides of my mouth. You were right." Okay? So in other words, all the things that I was bringing to the table, just ignored. But any of my white colleagues would say the same exact thing or something just similar. Great idea, blah, 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 blah. So these are the things as being in senior management that we deal with. And I think the final piece that's really missing, that was missing for me as being the only Black leader, is I had nobody that I could emulate. I had nobody that I could go to as a mentor and try to understand, how do I navigate this? Because at the end of the day, there's an old saying. My pastor of my church told me this, new levels, there's new devils. Okay. So at the end of the day, I'm trying to figure out, how do I deal with this? And is this real? Blah, blah, blah. And there's nobody. So you've got to figure it out yourself. Right? And then you hopefully bring in the younger people and you educate them. I mentor people all the time, young African-American people, Hispanic people, whatever. I'm always open because nobody was there for me and I want to be there for them.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Anybody follow up with
Hey,
that?
Wayne, if I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Brother Tony there hit the nail on the head. And I think that it doesn't matter what business, what corporate structure that folks get into. The only thing I tell you is believe in yourself, because you may be the only one in the room. Your ideas may not be listened to. Your emails may not be returned. Your phone calls may not be returned. I'm sure everyone on this panel has stories, but it all comes down to, at the end of the day, just believe in yourself. And when you believe in yourself, when you have that inner confidence, you find a way to stand up even in the darkest of times because you believe in yourself. And I think that goes a long way. And Tony also hit on the point of sometimes when you push back, you can shut people up right away. And I remember many years ago doing a little show called College Game Day. And I would be in the truck at some college location across the country. My boss would be in the control room in Bristol. And Wayne can relate to this. It would be after working, after traveling and working Friday for, 18 hours, and then being in the truck Saturday morning ready to go live with one of ESPN's main shows, one of their main money makers. My boss would be in the control room here in Bristol, and it would be something that would go wrong. He'd be on the headset with me, and it'd be something minor, something really minor would go wrong. And he would tear me apart. And other people on the, who were plugged into the audio system could hear this. And they would turn around in the truck and look at me, and I was the only person of color in the truck. And I just, I was flabbergasted, to tell you the truth. Why is this person coming at me so hard over something so minor? And then I would hear him in the control room in Bristol go after the person running, let's say, SportsCenter that morning. And the same minor mistake was handled in a much different tone. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, I called him and said, hey, can we meet and talk? We had a conversation. I said, I got to be honest with you. You're coming at me much harder than you do my white colleagues. Everybody wants perfection. Everybody wants to be the best. But you got to understand that you can't come at me in front of all these people with these other people who can hear this and treat me in a way that you're not treating my colleague. From that moment on, he backed off. To his defense or his credit, whatever, I guess he hadn't really thought about it that way. As soon as I pointed it out, he shut it. And I have, we've been, I don't work with him anymore, but we certainly have been in the same environment for the last many years. And he looks at me with nothing but respect now because I did stand up to him. And sometimes, again, it just comes down to believing in yourself and standing up for yourself. And it doesn't matter what industry you end up in. That is always the case. You got to stand up and believe in yourself.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that really quick. I think, this concept of pet to threat is very, very real, right? All of us on this call were a pet at one time. We were the new person of color, right? That probably fulfilled their diversity quota that they needed, all of that. And the more successful and the more confident you become in your role, you become threatening, right? And then you start to see people turn on you. And so, Tony, when I hear you say that he called you TT, which might have reflected the rapport that you had in your relationship, I also think as a matter of principle, and I would say this to all the college students who are going in, make them say your full name, because them shortening, especially if they do it without your permission, because that is a way that's a tactic that they use to diminish you. And I had to learn that. I didn't know that. And so I think it's a matter of asserting, right, how you want to be treated, knowing that, again, as the more successful you become, inherently you will become threatening, right? Even if you are the kindest, sweetest, sweet-talking person there, to see an empowered person of color really, really scares the institution and the legacy, right? All of these institutions are built on the legacy of white supremacy, which I really believe is white fragility. I think that's the reality of the situation, right? And it's not actually that they feel superior. It's actually that they feel very insecure. And so people like us threaten them, their sense of self and security. And so I think that's one tactic or takeaway, right? Something as simple as that, because you will find people who will immediately try to give you a nickname or, try to, and again, it could be from a good place and it could be very kind-hearted, but I think it's a matter of principle, call me the name that, I have them address you the way you want to be addressed, I think is the point. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
And also I want to add too, if you don't mind, I wanted just to add that for those people who are, or not people of color who are watching, make sure you know your audience and make sure that you are self-aware as well, because it's about self-awareness. Because you can build a rapport with a colleague, but like one of my old meteorologists, we worked together years ago, but we're good friends to this day. And he'll message me like, "Hey, Kimmy, I have a question." And he knows it's a safe space to come talk to me. find your team, find the people who you can be open with, to have honest dialogue, because the only way we're going to get past the things that you've heard so far on this call that have upset us or, demeaned us in any way is if we are empathetic and we have a conversation and we educate ourselves.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I think a lot of what I've been doing, especially within this past year, has been educating myself specifically about myself too. I think I've known a lot and I've noticed things. And I think what it is life happens so fast. You don't even know that certain, you're not able to put a term to things that are happening to you. Like, I think recently, I think it was like February, sometime when COVID was just starting, another pair of mine, we was just like, yo, gaslighting? Like, what is that? Like, what is that? And, and you start thinking about things, but also how you may have gaslit yourself in different things and in different ways that you were brought up in to how to present yourself and, sort of making yourself smaller. So I think a lot of what I've been doing is also keeping myself accountable so I can definitely keep others accountable and sort of feel comfortable in presenting as that dominant person, or feel comfortable in establishing myself as, this 23-year-old rather than this intern that you had, or, you know what I mean? Like, feel comfortable in where you've come and all the strengths and what you bring to the table by knowing yourself better. So I think I've done that a lot and I've seen how beneficial it has been. So I would just echo your statement.
Yeah, thanks, folks. This is for everyone, right? No matter, race, gender, when we talk about, there's always going to be conflict in the workplace or conflict anywhere, right? And you've just heard great examples of addressing the conflict, but when you do address the conflict, it's in a non-threatening manner, but you also are bringing facts to the table, right? And that is going to kind of support and build upon your credibility when you do that. So remember that, folks. Any type of conflict, you want to bring the facts to the table. You want to use you don't want to use, you language, right? You want to avoid that, because saying you did this and you did that kind of inflicts blame on someone, and someone could get very defensive about that. So, take the time to rethink how you are going to approach someone and bring those facts to the table, which kind of leads me to the next type of topic and how we react to these things, how we react to bias and transgressions. Michael, I know you've got a story from, what's happened on air recently. You want to share that story about, expressing a view compared to speaking out?
Yeah, and not to make too big a deal about it, but it does happen, and I think it is a good example. There was, on one of the shows, a person of color, the anchor was reading a bump going in a commercial, talking about, hey, such and such is coming up, and you can't wait to hear him speaking out about whatever the topic was. And I've heard the same type of language used if it was a white analyst, and the phrasing was a little bit different in that, hey, such and such is coming up and he has some good thoughts on blah. And you're like, well, wait a second, how come when the person of color speaks out or has something thoughtful and good perspective, it's speaking out, but when the person of non-color has similar thoughts, it's not phrased quite the same? And again, words matter. So the term speaking out certainly seems a little bit more hostile and less friendly than terminology used to describe similar thoughts of. So again, don't want to make too big a deal out of that one, but it does happen. It's just something to be aware of.
that falls under that, benevolence kind of thing. One of those things that could be, oh, you know what, that's a great point. you know so let's turn this into a positive here. Where do we go from here, right? um Seeing, I want to go to Danielle here because she's our youngest. So we're seeing a convergence here of racial consciousness, of awareness, and especially in your generation. How are you seeing this new level of awareness at IBM? What's that company doing to address this awareness?
I think one of the biggest commitments that IBM has taken is in the um, supporting my school and supporting schools like mine. So PTech is a huge program or school program, I guess, that has been applied and expanded across the world. And I think IBM has really just tried to not only commit to bringing more people of color and just diverse candidates into the organization through the pipeline that PTech creates, but also I've been involved in a lot of reshaping what the transition is from high school to college to industry, and making sure that when you bring people in, they are set up to actually succeed. I think a lot of what I've had to do is just from being a New Yorker, or just from things you learn and you pick up and meeting people in elevators that end up being bigger than you think, and networking, and a lot of the support system that I picked up from my school and my friends and stuff. But I think what they're trying to do is actually make it so that it applies to more people rather than the exception. And that's actually something that that's where I come in as a subject matter expert, as an alum of the school. How can I make it better for the people that are coming in? And I think just having that, and I'm only going to speak to that from what they're doing as a corporation, because that's what I know. And I don't want to say something wrong or right about any other things that they're doing. But I have, good faith that it's going to be better for anyone that comes through my school. And it's going to be an improved process. But also, just as a designer, I think we have been taking more, especially just me. I want to say I've never met as many Black professionals as I have in this past couple months. Literally, like, the only other person I know in New York, there's actually two people I know in New York, and they came from my school that I work with, that's in the same field. So I've just been talking to them. It's just sort of opened the floodgates. We have different groups and Slack channels that came from it. And my team is super supportive, and I really love my team and the women that I work with. I say women because it's mainly female designers, so we're all just like a sorority, low key. But I love my team. But it is another thing to have someone that you can look forward, that you can see in yourself. I remember, like, I want to say 2-3 months ago, I realized there was a female design exec, a Black female design exec, and she had a Brooklyn accent. I was like, oh, that's what's up. I'm about to DM you on Slack. And I hit her up on Slack, come to find out she's from Trinidad, where I'm from. And I was like, wow, you know what? This don't make no sense, but we about to have this friendship. And sort of just setting that up and making sure that that was there. So I think they've been, it's a lot of things that we are more connected. People of color within the organization have become more connected, but also the commitment that they're trying to see through with my school and schools like mine is, I'll say, how IBM's been doing it. I can't speak for all the other facets and parts of our corporation, but yeah.
Great, thank you, Danielle. Akemi, what's going on at NBC 30? I know NBC 30 is the local, but then you have the overarching umbrella of Universal. So what's been the talks, and what's been some of the actions going on there?
Yeah, no, also, I love that Danielle has now what Tony says he didn't have, which is someone to look up to, a mentor. That is so important for all who are listening. Reach out, network, don't be afraid, because I love helping those who come under me, the people who help me as I'm still rising. It's necessary. So just focus on that, especially as you're still in school or transitioning. Don't hesitate to reach out to a professor. But as far as the conversations that we're having over at NBC Connecticut, they are on a national level. So we have NBC OTS stations, which is own television stations. And when George Floyd happened and we started to see like this racial reckoning, this unrest, but of course, the people on this panel know there's always been unrest. There's never anything that's been okay. We just, I mean, you tell us that COVID's affecting us worse than any other group, and then you're going to kill somebody the way it happened. It just really upset people. And then we started to have this internal dialogue. So on a national level, like different groups and stations were having internal dialogues. That's one thing we did to like show and to really just provide examples that the people you work next to every day have endured some crazy and really bad things in terms of racism and just flat out racism. So we've got vulnerable. I helped organize that with some other people of our Black Employee Network that we have. I believe, Michael, if I'm correct, they have a Black employee type network at ESPN.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so it's like those are very important. So you may find at the next company you work for or the company you end up going to, they may have a network already. So we're able to do that, and they did it across the company. But so there was like a big one for all the stations, and then we had one locally. As far as our coverage, I'm very proud that NBC has come up with like their version of like a style guide, something to say like, hey, here's something, just a couple bullet points that you need to know about as we're asking questions. And, you know, like they really broke down what you shouldn't say, what you can't say. And it's just been conversations that we have editorially. So I'm very proud to see the strides that NBC, Universal, and Comcast is taking, because Comcast pledged $100 million to an initiative to say, we need to do better. They've promoted a senior vice president over diversity and inclusion just for the own television station. So I have, and I hate to say that I was surprised, but after you've had so many promises from so many corporate people, you know, that you're like, okay, we'll see. And then you're finally like, oh my God, I'm seeing it. So I'm very proud of what we're doing, and the fact that inclusion and diversity is a part of our daily editorial conversations. That means a lot.
Great. Mallory, what are you seeing, especially in the freelance world? I think you have a great perspective, from, looking into things. So what's been your perspective?
Well, what's interesting, so again, I left sort of the institutional world and, went to the freelance world because a lot of the topics that we're talking about today. And I think, the message is, no matter where you go, you're going to run into this, right? So even operating outside the system, quote unquote, there is no operating outside the system. So, as a freelance producer, a lot of our clients are city governments and, public education systems, nonprofits, small businesses who all operate inside the system. So, I've actually continued to experience a lot of the things that we're talking about. So I think it's a lot of what we already heard, self-awareness, knowing your environment. I also think, it's about building up your self-sufficiency and being able to self-advocate. I think that's really what it comes down to, right? And understanding that change is... it's a monster, right? It's a monster, and to expect people to do right, I think is a lofty expectation. I think we live in a harsh reality, and that's just something, especially as people of color, that we just have to accept and do the best we can, right? And navigate the best way we can to maintain as much integrity and dignity as possible. From my point of view, that is the game. It's not about, winning or conquering or, because the system won't let you. The system is a monster in and of itself. So again, recognizing the environment and the game that you're playing, I think could go a long way in terms of you managing your own emotional and mental health. Because I think if you go in with these wild expectations, like, again, you're going to change the system or you're somehow going to be the exception, I think we all can tell you that that's just not the way things work, right? And so I really think it's about Yeah. Again, I think it comes down to your own integrity and dignity. And for me, it just felt like I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't show up at work and feel good about myself. And so I had to draw a line. And so I kind of opted out. And so now it's a whole other battle and challenge of how to continue to be self-sufficient with trying to operate outside the system as much as possible, which has its own host of challenges. So again, I don't think there's any sort of like perfect answer or good answer. I just think it is about having tactics and tools. So one thing I wanted to say earlier was, you know, in these conversations and in these meetings, whether they're, you know, overt or microaggressions, a good tactic that I've learned is to ask probing questions. So one quick story is, you know, when I was working at public media, I was spearheading an initiative focused on people of color. Public media in 50 years has never served people of color, even though it's in a community of 85% people of color. Long story short, once it became a real thing, I had an executive literally say to me, I don't want this ghetto thing, right? And use that word ghetto. And like literally, I'm sweating. I feel like I'm gonna pounce on this woman. That's how I felt, right? And I remember something my mother told me was, anytime someone says something to you that is that, you know, blatant and contentious, make them explain it. Make them explain what they mean by that. And so I simply asked her, what do you mean by that? Right? And then you see kind of the backpedaling. So I think it's about having tools and strategies of how to, you know, navigate these moments that are inevitable. So, you know, people think, oh, you know, it's 2020 and racism is going to go away. It's post-Obama. And, you know, and we all know clearly that's not true. So, you know, don't have this expectation that somehow life is fair, because it is not. And George Floyd reminded us of that again, right? And so, again, it's about being able to speak up for yourself in a way that's tactful, in a way that can be received. I think that is really the biggest challenge, like how to keep, and it's the burden that we bear, which is unfortunate, right? Like it's on us, it's our responsibility. We have to check our tone. Not that they have to, you know, check their privilege, but we have to check our tone. So also accepting that extra burden and the reality of that, and being in practice, because it is a practice. You know, because emotions are a powerful raw force that many times can just take over. And then, you know, you black out for a second and you're like, oh boy, did I just say that moment? And so we don't have the luxury or privilege for those mistakes and mishaps, because they will write you off in a second. And so really being in practice of how really, I think, to manage your emotions when things get contentious, because they will, and expect them to, and to have tools for when that happens.
Yeah, well said. Hey, we are moving to our question and answer portion. Marvin, who's been great setting all this stuff up and looking over the chats. Any questions for our panelists?
Yeah, so we did get a question from Tracy Heather Strain. She asks, do you think it is important to emphasize that the panelists spoke to the individuals first about an issue versus today when folks go to the public via social media? All right. So yeah, so I kind of rephrase that question. So what are your thoughts on that? I think we should, do you think you should emphasize that to the students, or as a mentor, would you emphasize that versus, you know, going straight to social media and kind of complaining about it? You know, thoughts?
Anybody?
Yeah, can I jump?
Sure, yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
You hear me? Yeah. So and again, and just going back to the example I gave earlier, I always believe you go directly to the individual, institution. I mean, whatever the individual you have in a situation with. Again, something my mother always brought up with me is give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I think the panelists have chatted a little bit about, I think Michael talked about this as well as Akemi and Mallory about implicit bias. I think sometimes people are not even aware of what they say, what they do. So based on that, it's always important to give that person a benefit of the doubt, go directly to them, very positive, professional, have a direct conversation. And 9 times out of 10, it typically works out. So that would be my advice to anyone.
I'd also like to chime in if I may. Yes, totally everything that Tony said. Because too, if you don't understand what has happened, you have a perception as to what was said and what has happened. But then you go to social media and then it goes viral. And now your employer's like, what? I feel that it cannot be good. Nothing ever can come good by shooting off some tweets. You may feel better in the moment because you kind of vented and you said, oh my gosh, can you believe this happened? But that's why it's so important to have a support system, because I can't tell you how many times that I've had to go to, my mom, or, I had to like message somebody to say, hey, this happened. Can you just help me with it? Because nothing can be good if I just go and I start blasting off about an employee or my boss on Twitter. Then I feel good about it after, oh, it was a misunderstanding. Those tweets are still out there and it's not good. So it may seem scary to go and face somebody. I mean, oh my gosh, I can only imagine, Tony, how you were feeling when you had to go to that colleague. And I mean, I'd have to like hype myself up to be like, okay, I got to go. I have to have this conversation. But once you do, you walk away with a better understanding, and that person may walk away with a better understanding. So I would never advise, I guess, long story short, I never advise going to social first. Always take the situation and conflict to the person. And you may want to reach out to a mentor or somebody who you respect in your personal circle to get advice on how to navigate it.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Also, it's just most of the times, most of these situations are super complex, and there are so many different things at play. Because I think Tony mentioned this, like not having race be in the middle of everything, and in fact, like in my case too, I've always seen like there are moments where age plays hand in hand and things like that, and it is imperative to just have these conversations, because even when I mentioned earlier, like washing dishes and stuff, after having different like conversations, it's more, you would also realize it's not even just sometimes specifically race, it's also cultural differences, especially when you work at these huge companies, or there's some people who never really had to do stuff like that, or are so used to this one way of doing things. And also, not to say that they are good or bad explicitly, but once you have that conversation, you both can come to a better conclusion, and just you're able to also experience things a bit more comfortably and navigate the workforce a little bit. Especially, well, I'm just speaking also from my past and just like the way I've been.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in? No?
I'll add in maybe a slightly different perspective. So generally, yes, I think context matters, right? And it depends on the situation exactly. And, what you've done before you've gone to, I don't think it should be your first stop. But I think what we do know about social media is that it is a tool, and it has in many cases held companies accountable and made companies act in times that they wouldn't, right, if it wasn't public knowledge. And I think that's actually the power of social media, right? We've seen it with Facebook. There's a lot of examples. So I think it really depends on the context. But if there's a situation where you feel like, and I would say probably it can't be an individual thing. It would have to be like a systemic thing or a truly moral, ethical issue, right? Something massive. It's like knowing what cards to play when. But social media, that is the brilliance of social media, actually, is that it is a tool that people on the ground have to publicly hold institutions and companies accountable when they're not doing the right thing. And so that's like last resort. That's the biggest gun you got, right? And so you don't want to pull it out all, recklessly, right? You have to be very, very strategic. And I would say you should have a coalition of people behind you before you take a very public stand like that.
I agree with that. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar, Mallory, with Adidas, but something recently happened with Adidas where a couple of employees in two different countries were experiencing the same thing. So it's systemic. And so a lady, one of the employees wrote a Medium article, and I was listening about it on, I think it was the Wall Street Journal's The Journal podcast, but that was her gun, and she used it, and now there's actual change. So you're right. You have to make sure that and she actually said to her, I was alone. I felt alone. But then other employees started to come forward. So I totally agree with that. If it got to the point where you're like, okay, I have nowhere else to go, and this is so deeply rooted in, all the things that are wrong.
Great. And I do have a quick follow-up to that question. So we've talked a lot about some positive outcomes to these conversations. Do you guys have any examples of, a conversation that you tried having and it didn't go your way and how you handled it? Because I know that we said that it kind of made the person on the other end realize something and kind of worked out the issue. But have you had an experience where, it kind of backfired, or it didn't go your way, or it was like a whole, it became a thing where you either got scolded more, or you got a worse experience, or so how did you deal with that, if any? Just curious.
Yeah, I'll say real quick. I learned after a couple of weird conversations where I knew I felt uncomfortable and hurt, and for different people, whatever had happened, that I had to understand my expectations going into the conversation, so that I'd go in and, you know what, I need to tell this person how I'm feeling and what they said made me feel. I need to understand that they may not receive anything I'm saying. I need to understand that I have made at least a plea to say, let's understand and communicate with each other and understand each other better. But you can't really I just, in my experience, have learned that you usually walk away with a better understanding of each other and feeling lighter because you've had the conversation, but you're not responsible for how that person receives it, as long as you've gone into it respectfully. And if you have in your own way documented, even personally, here's what I had to do, that allows you, if that person treated, let's say, after Michael went to his manager and things got better, if it gone the other way, at least Michael can say, you know what, people were witness to this, this didn't go the certain way, now he's targeting me, and now you can start escalating that situation. So I would just say, for me, I had to check my own expectations of, well, I hope this person isn't going to feel a certain way. And I'm thinking more of the person versus I need to do this for me because I'm the one walking away feeling offended. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I would say this, the conversation, and Wayne spoke about this a little earlier, when the conversation is about gathering facts, right? Because as Mallory says, and I was laughing because I definitely know where she's coming from, we're emotional creatures, and your emotions are exactly what they are. They're not facts, right? So you may perceive a certain situation and it may not be true. So that's why you have the conversation, right? And the conversation is confirm or deny what you may feel, what you thought happened, and let the other person know that as well. And to Akima's point, after that, I feel you feel a lot better because you went and had this conversation and you got that off your chest, right? You either confirmed what you thought or you found out that you were wrong, right? Or the person acknowledged, yep, I'm sorry, and all you guys came out a lot better. Now, I have been in situations where it didn't get better, right? But guess what? Now I know because it confirmed my facts, right? So that's really the key. The conversation is to confirm facts. And by doing that, it's going to make you feel better. And you're going to find out either way, you can't control how somebody acts, but at least now you know, and you're not like, is it this, or maybe it's that, or am I wrong? That's really more empowering than anything.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else? We do have another question that I want to go into. Okay, cool. So We have a question from Heather, and she asks, as educators in digital media committed to diversity and inclusion, what can we do to reach out to potential students to help them feel welcome, comfortable, and free to use their voice? I can repeat the question if anyone needs. Okay, yeah, so your question.
Yeah, I just didn't want to like overtake. I feel like I've been speaking so much. Yeah, no, I think there's always like that feeling, but I think that being just open. Hey, if you, well, since we're speaking to students, if you get a job out of school, and you're going into, and this is a new person with no experience. Hey, if you need anything here, I'm here to help you. Or hey, I may not, I'm in a different department, but I noticed, you just started. Let me know. I think that we have to just reach out. And I know it's easy to get in our bubbles, right? And so if you get in your bubble, you're only staying in your bubble and you have your blinders on. I think we just have to all collectively, no matter person of color, non-person of color, work together to make sure that people do feel included, so that when something happens, they already feel comfortable to come to you or comfortable to have an opinion, an open opinion about something.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that. I think it's what Tony said. It's seeing people. It's acknowledging and validating people. So, taking time and wanting to get to know people, I think is like the fundamental strategy. Where are you from? Tell me about your life. Do you have siblings? Like, what I've learned, people want to talk about themselves. If you give them a mic, they will go off. And so let people talk about themselves, because I think that it makes them feel like they exist. Like if no one sees you, you don't know that you exist. Literally, you have no reference point. And so I think diversity and inclusion, I feel like it's one of these phrases that has lost its meaning because it's overused and probably misused and not acted upon. But I really think it's about making people know that you see them, that they exist, and that you're interested in getting to know them.
Yeah, and I'll just go a bit further by saying that they can see themselves within the curriculum as well. I think it's important to note that, especially as a designer, you tend to always see like the greats being not someone that looks like you, or even like, I think growing up, I've always looked at like, Missy Elliott videos and just different stuff that I've seen, or even a design of a certain sneaker. That's my art. That's decorated my walls for years. And I've never wanted to change that. But I think it's interesting when you come into these new places and you don't see that anymore. And you don't see people regarding that as something like, just bring, what I mean? Like having those people be reflected in curriculum, or if you can tailor curriculum to have different people of color, producers or artists or designers, or just having, being able to see yourself as in the future too, to be like, okay, that's like, for me, one sneaker designer that I love is Laylee May. And a lot of times when I bring her up to like other designers, they're like, yo, no, she's not even designing. She's just picking colors. But what are we doing? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? So it's just a lot of things. But having a space to see as your own in the curriculum is, I think, amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for your responses, Wayne. I'll just bring it right back to you.
Great. Hey, we're coming towards the end here, so I just want to just give a chance for final thoughts from everyone. Michael, I'll start with you. Final thoughts as we come to an end to our discussion.
Thanks, Wayne. I would say that at no time in history is it more important to have a diverse newsroom, a diverse news gathering force. And by diverse, I don't necessarily mean skin color or skin tone, but people who are committed to being fair and accurate and getting it right. At no time in history has it ever been more important. Believe in yourself. Always believe in yourself. Stand up for yourself. There will be some bumps in the road. Let's be clear. There will be some bumps in the road. But believe in yourself and you'll get through it.
Thank you, Michael. Akemi, I come to you.
I mean, Michael summed it up. I mean, believing in yourself first, because that's going to give you the drive and the determination that when somebody's like, oh, we just don't think you're good enough, you're going to be like, well, that's a lie, because I know I am. So like you're going to have that confidence. And even when you may be outwardly confident but feel some type of way on the inside, also get you a board of directors. And I just learned this term about 3 months ago, that board of directors are your mentors. You got somebody who's going to hype you up. You're going to have somebody who's going to keep you rounded to be like, okay, here are the things you need to work on. And there's some things you need to have somebody who's going to tell you the things that, hey, you need to work on 3 things, or you need to work on this before you go. Consult your people. And then, of course, your personal support system, your people praying for you and stuff. You just have to have those people in your pocket. If you don't have those people, I guarantee that at least 2 people who can put you in touch with somebody, because you don't even have to be in the same field. Tony's been in sales. I completely relate to what he's saying, because he's, on that track of which I'm trying to get to in terms of, being a senior vice president of news or something one day, but he's in sales. That doesn't mean that he can't say, oh, I had an example just like that when I was in a lower level director position like you are. So yeah, I would say all the things that you guys need to work on is being self-aware, being confident, and getting your team, your board of directors.
I've always joked with, but maybe not really a joke with my students, because I say when you folks are gone and out of here and graduated and you move on up the ladder, think of good old Wayne Edwards back there in New Haven, that I could be a part of your board member. Just pay me enough stocks.
Exactly.
Anyway, I go to Tony. Tony, final thoughts.
Yeah, this has been great. Look, Michael and Akemi hit it right on the head. Be confident. Obviously network. Be willing. This is a key. Be willing to accept feedback. Okay, because we all have blind spots, and you can't learn if you're not willing to open it. There's an old saying: the mind is like an umbrella. It only works when it's open. So at the end of the day, accept feedback and continue to build your knowledge, right? If some of the things that we talked about there, I'm going to throw some books out, How to Win Friends, Influence People. Read that book. It'll teach you how to build relationships, how not to criticize others, how to accept, how to give feedback. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Help you develop your own confidence and how the power you have within your own hand and mind that most of us don't even know. So there's a lot of things that I've read that really helped me. But then what Michael and Akemi said, the other thing is making alliances with other individuals, right? There's always somebody who knows something that you don't. Okay. And the more people that, regardless of what field that they're in, I've been blessed that, God gave me 2 ears and I've used them for the most part. Right. And I was able to learn from people all over. It didn't matter what field they came from, what race they were. I've been fortunate to be across the globe, and I'm always learning. I'll never stop learning, because nothing grows in a comfort zone. Nothing grows in a comfort zone. So be willing to be uncomfortable. And what that means is be willing to do stuff that's outside of something you already do, because that's how that excellence, that talent that you have inside of you is going to come out, because you're going to stretch yourself. So be willing to be uncomfortable. Life's there. I'm an optimist. I think we're moving on something great. I think you guys are our future. You're going to take it to the next level. Some of you, a few years from now, I'm going to be looking on YouTube and I'm going to see you hosting a series. Maybe Wayne is working for you. So, listen, life's there. Go out and grab it.
Mallory Mason.
I would say a few things. Know your worth, right? And know your values. That will always be your North Star. If you're not clear on what your core values are, and therefore what your boundaries are, you'll compromise them often. And so, do the work of sitting in silence with yourself to surface those values. And that only comes through silence, which leads me to my next thing, which is your intuition knows, right? Your intuition knows. So listen to your inner voice. Don't compromise. Don't think. Don't overthink. Right? Your gut will always tell you, and educate yourself.
Danielle, our youngest panelist. I always want to, I have to end with you because you're the closest to the generation that's watching this. So, final words.
Honestly, I feel like everyone has touched on or said everything that I've just been honestly nodding along with them. Specifically, I think one thing that I've always said and has always been told to me is to know yourself. I think it's probably the all-encompassing term, word for or phrase for what everyone's been saying. But knowing yourself, knowing what comes with that, having that time. I've sat in silence, but also knowing when to stop, and that is what Mallory just mentioned with boundaries and allowing yourself growth. This is going to sound really corny, but I think it's Matthew McConaughey. He has I'm super into like acting and the study of acting. And Matthew McConaughey, when he accepted his 2014 Oscars, I believe, I think he said you need three things in life to keep you pushing. I think he said something to look forward to, something to keep chasing. And I forgot the last one, but the thing that he said at the end was pretty interesting because he said someone asked him when he was 15 who's his hero, and he said 10 years later. And same again, 10 years later they asked him, and he kept saying the same thing. And he was just like, every 10 years, like I'm closer to my hero, but I'm never gonna catch that person. But I know of that person, and I'm aware of that person, and so it was something that obviously it's very generic when you say it out loud, but it's something that I always think about, and knowing that I'm sort of fighting for that person. I'm continuing to be for that person, and to make that person a reality one day. So I guess that's how I end.
And that's a great ending too. That's a great one. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their experiences, insights, and advice with us this evening. Listen, I hope this information brings a sense of awareness to those about to enter the industry. And for those already in it, a spark to rethink how diverse backgrounds can be seen and heard in the workplace. We covered a lot tonight, and it's great. So take it, absorb it, be that sponge and absorb the information. Be that spark to change perception of how diverse backgrounds are portrayed, and especially in content creation and behind the scenes. There's so much that can be accomplished when we come together to just talk, right? So much. So shout out Marvin Lewis, my man. Not only moderating the questions, but he has been instrumental in setting up and the lead up to this. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, my friend. Next week on Let's Talk Media, it's Making Films That Matter, featuring Agnes Mossi, hosted by Heather Elliott Famularo. And that's next Thursday, September 24th at 5 p.m. Hey, be sure to follow Digital Media Connecticut on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just list them all. And whatever the newest one is coming out, whatever the newest social media, kind of follow it too. So for Mallory, Akemi, Danielle, Tony, and Michael, I'm Wayne Edwards. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Media. So long, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.